So I wanna take one particular phrase you said in the middle of that, which was, you said specifically, if we get this right, then this can be like a beautiful industry and market that emerges over the next 5 years with that diversity that you spoke of. What do you see, if anything, that's not going right now related to all that needs to shift to make this vision that you're speaking of possible?
So there's probably 100 things I could speak on. And like I say, like having the long-term perspective of having submitted probably 50 plus recommendations to Health Canada over the course of the first few years of our licensing process, many of which were adopted, to say this is broken, this needs to change, we need to evolve this, from an industry perspective, but also just from a regulatory perspective. There's certain areas where you need tight regulation. There's certain areas where you need to facilitate operation a bit more effectively. Mm-hmm. But I'll tell you a story. Like, oh my God, I just ashed on myself. rookie move here. I'm trying to do 7 things at once, so I'm going to start talking to you. We've seen some really awesome, success stories coming out of smaller producers that come to market. They come with a promise of quality. They get an audience largely digitally. They don't spend a ton of money on marketing, and that audience is fired up about their offerings. They're super stoked about the quality of the product. Brands like Gnome Star, Boaz, Carmel Cannabis. I could go on for hours. There's a ton of really good consumer success stories out there. Those companies, they start selling, their sell-through goes up, they start blowing up, they start not having enough product, and that's a good problem to have if you've built your financial models correctly. Yeah. Maybe they sell product at a price point that allows them to take a margin. All of a sudden, they're profitable, and then they have to pay their excise tax. Yeah. And this is absolutely heartbreaking. We're taking the excise tax out of the middle of the supply chain, and we're loading it all onto producers, and that has the effect of ripple affecting the price up as we go. And of the craft operators that I've spoken to that are now about a year in, or as long as a year in, to understanding their financials and understanding how much money they can actually make, they would be substantially profitable enough to grow their businesses organically, profitable enough to make sure everybody eats well, the lights stay on and they get to keep doing what they're doing. And then Health Canada, or CRA, I should say, is taking 20%, 25%, maybe 30% in some cases of their top line revenue. That's all of their profit and then some. And it's definitely true for Tantalus Labs. We have cash flowed. We cash flowed very early. We've had good financial health. And then every month, it's just such a ripping a duct tape Band-Aid off. You're like, oh my God, I can't believe we have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in some months to, just keep this whole situation going forward. And ultimately, we're still in the substantial minority of sales in Canada when it comes to legal versus illicit market cannabis. I think that I know a ton of illicit suppliers, a ton of legacy suppliers that are doing great right now. And they don't have a strong incentive. They don't have a strong incentive to come over and join us that are out here crashing through the brambles in legal space. And mad love to all the craft operators that are in that zone, because they can't see a view to how to make a half decent living. We're not talking about getting rich. We're not talking about blowing the roof off. We're talking about making enough profit to be able to reinvest into your business, change your packaging, do some new SKUs, do those kinds of things. And so that excise regime is just ridiculously punitive, maybe unintentionally punitive. But at $1 a gram, it is no exaggeration to say that 20 to 30% and more of your top line revenue may go to that every month. And it just absolutely cripples a craft producer's ability to make money and stay on the playing field. If we don't grow our craft numbers, we're not talking about keeping it the same of the amount of craft producers that are there now. We want to see thousands. We want to see so many, different people contributing in different ways. And it just rips me up that the government's milking a calf to death. I had a tweet thread on it yesterday. You're going to see more from me and from others on this topic, but that excise tax needs to change, dude. We're, like I say, we're not out here trying to steal money, trying to get rich, trying to make money quickly. We're just saying we need a sustainable business model that functions across businesses of different scale. And the crippling thing is, I know I'm rambling. I do this. Maybe I shouldn't have smoked all that weed, right? The large LPs don't really care. The large LPs are substantially subsidized by their shareholders. You got to keep in mind, every time you buy a pack of Shred, which is a commercial success and not hating on Shred, Organigram is taking a negative 40% gross margin on that product. That means that they are literally getting their shareholders to pay 40% of the price of that so that they can actually make money or quote unquote make shelf space. Mm-hmm. And that's just not a position that any logical business person nor craft like mom and pop style operation is going to be able to entertain. I can't sell my product at a loss. We wouldn't package up our shake and sell it if we were paying more for packaging and distribution than we were for actually making the money. So when you have that kind of environment, the large LPs, they can go on for 5 years, even if the tax regime is not sustainable, and they just wait for all their competitors to die, for all the people that are currently killing them in market share and sucking down their market share by a huge amount. They just slowly keel over, can't keep going, go into receivership. Maybe the large LPs buy them out of receivership. How fucked is that?
Yeah.
And so we're not going to get a champion in C3 or in the large LPs or in the politically connected LPs or in the LPs with huge government relations budgets. This is going to have to be an organic groundswell. This is going to have to be a bunch of small producers coming together and representing small business, which, by the way, was part of the regulations. They said they were looking at this through a small business lens, and now is the time to hold their feet to the fire. So rant over. That's my view. Fuck the excise tax regime. We gotta make some smart reform changes.
So first off, I didn't realize it was that massive of a cut that was being taken out of the top line revenue of businesses in order to pay off that excise tax. That's huge, and I did not realize it was quite that big.
We pay maybe 3 times as much in excise tax as we do in labor. Tantalus Labs, as a labor input, we have like 65 employees. We pay living wages in Maple Ridge. We make sure all our people are well compensated, and so they feel committed to staying. And every month, that's 1/3 of what we pay in excise tax.
Holy shit!
Fucking crazy, right?
That's ridiculous,
dude. And so what happened was, that's why I say unintentional, is that originally they built this tax model to say the larger of $1 or 10% of the price of the gram. It's called an ad valorem tax. And that means that you get 2 options and they'll take whatever's more. So inevitably, when they wrote that policy, they said, well, there'll be some stuff at $15 a gram. And so on that stuff, we want to charge $1.50. What they didn't realize is that ad valorem tax has never once been levied. There's never been a wholesale price of cannabis that was above $10. The average in the market right now is probably more like $5. And it's been pulled down substantially over the course of this year. And
sorry, just to interrupt for a moment there. Sure. The price that you're talking about there, are you talking about like a processor that has packaged and prepped something for retail sale, selling to a distributor, to a provincial distributor? Is that the sale that you're talking about when you say average is $5?
Right. Yes. The wholesale price of cannabis and that's at the end of the licensed processor chain, if that's the way you look at it. Tantalus Labs has a standard license, so we cultivate and then we process. We add our tax stamps and then we send it out the door. And luckily we sell for a bit above average, not a crazy amount above average. There's some people that can sell for a lot above average, but they just don't really get a lot of volume. So maybe that's the micro model to a T. But there's cannabis that sells for $2 a gram out there, and $1 of that is excise tax. It's just phenomenal to think. And so our view is that we can tell by the fact that the 10% number's really never been used, that perhaps someone in the kind of financial policy group that were looking at how to tax this plant, they thought that wholesale prices would normalize maybe around $8 or $9. Well, that's not what's happened at all. And so I think that shows that Health Canada, Health Canada Finance Ministry and CRA together, they might not have been aware of what a huge cut it was going to be, but the way that it's played out, it's really just drinking the blood of these tiny businesses that are trying to grow and trying to get their feet under them as they launch a startup. Launching a startup sucks anyway. Launching a cannabis startup and then realizing you have to pay a pint of blood every month to keep on the playing field, it's disheartening. And that's not functional. Like, it's going to cause oligopolization in the industry. It's going to cause deep cuts to these people who oftentimes have double mortgaged their houses to be able to be in this business. So that's why it gets me fired up. And I think that's why we need to motivate change by standing together and saying, look, you guys don't tax oil and gas this way. You don't tax alcohol this way. You don't tax CPG goods this way. You don't tax maple syrup this way. You don't tax any other product in this country the way you're taxing cannabis at the beginnings of an infant industry. And you're taxing us all to death.
Yeah. So, practical question here. You said that in the regulations they have they specifically stated that they wanted to model this to support smaller businesses, and that this was the time to hold them accountable to that. Where in the regulations can I find this thing that you're referring to? Because I want to do exactly what you're talking about. I want to go find that regulations. I have contacts both Health Canada and the CRA, and I want to reach out to them and tell them this is not okay. How can I go about doing that? What would you recommend?
So the taxation would be in the Cannabis Act. I have to admit, I probably haven't dusted that thing off in a while. But
well, you don't read it every morning before breakfast?
There was a time when I read it very, very thoroughly, of course, but it's not part of my day to day. But I think the core of it really is that the ad valorem taxation component should just be a floating number at the core of it. Figure out what that number is. Maybe it's 10%, maybe it's not. And I do have another solution actually that might be, practical for this audience. You asked, how can you get in touch? You asked initially, how do you get in touch?
And importantly, like, is there a best way to frame things that you would encourage? Because you've reached out to government a lot. You've had these kind of experiences. You've made recommendations before. Like, I assume just sending an email being like, this is fucked up, I paid so much that's not going to land too well, Yeah. So like, how would you encourage somebody in our audience who's feeling inspired to add their voice so that the CRA knows this is like a legitimate issue? What would you say to that?
That's an awesome question. So I've met a lot of different cannabis growers. I've probably met like 500 cannabis growers, and there are a lot of cowboys out there. Anyone who's denying that is wrong. People that aren't used to team play. People that have come up on their own and they learn from a mentor, and they're kind of a lone wolf. And a lot of you out there, some of you out there, probably not the people on this chat, probably the people that are not on this chat.
Definitely not our audience. Our audience is super respectful and kind.
Some of these operators lack diplomacy. You're in a highly politicized industry, guys. We are in the most regulated industry in Canada, period. And there's a degree of strategy around approaching public entities and government officials that you need to be mindful of if you want to get results. Now, look, I'm like numb to it. Like, I'm so deeply scarred by the processes that were true in the MMPR, where we spent 1,869 days getting licensed. Count that out. That's fucking 4.5 years. There have been so many times where I want to pound on the desk. And like, look at me, I'm a big guy, I'm bald, I'm scary. I could be like, this is insanity. But I learned to check myself, and I learned to be able to formulate that into a message that can be digested and respectfully received. Now, this is massaging it. It's all about when you think from their shoes, right? I think from the shoes of a policymaker or a bureaucrat. That's a bit different than a politician. The difference is the politicians are the ones that are out there championing causes and pulling people towards their party,
being public faces of whatever they're fighting for.
The bureaucrats are the operators. They're the ones that are getting knee deep in the issues and trying to figure out how to advance policy, sometimes shrink policy, mostly grow policy. And so you kind of have to frame up their view of the world, which there are probably some bureaucrats on this line right now. It leans towards more like being a hall monitor than it does about being an innovator. That's not meant to be disrespectful. They got to protect the status quo at some element in their jobs. So always be super nice. I mean, come on, everyone's just out here grinding. They're working long hours. Everyone's pushing hard. So being respectful is really key. But more than that, frame up your idea. Say you want to attack a problem. Frame that problem up in a really concise way so you can articulate it clearly and show who it affects. Then, if you're smart, you're going to come with a few ideas on how we can make some changes. And really, if you're really smart, you're going to come with a few ideas that are, how do we get towards solutions? And so let's take what I'm talking about right now. This is like a fun way to deliver a punchline.
Yeah.
I definitely have done a ton of communication with the finance ministry, Health Canada, and CRA, but sometimes the greatest traction that you can get can be just from your own MLAs and your own people that will listen. There's a ton of smart people in cannabis policy across Canada. You got to dig a little deeper to figure out exactly who they are, but I'm happy to provide my own stakeholder map and show people kind of where they need to be talking to if they want to talk to the right people in BC, or if they want to talk to the right people in the finance ministry, or what have you. So there's a little digging, but your own MLA and your own representative should be able to plug you into the right people, and fostering a relationship with those local politicians, whether they be MLAs or MPs, or they just be like even municipal councils and stuff like that. They can get your message in the right places, and having a long-term relationship with them. If you want to be in the game in 10 years, you're going to be dealing with the same sorts of people, right? So you definitely want to make it known that you're here to work towards solutions, and you have an idea of some problems, but like you're going to be reasonable, respectful of their time, and respectful in general.
That's awesome advice. I'd never considered talking to my MLA, who actually is a huge, my MLA started the Cannabis Conservancy a while back, and she's super into cannabis and wants to see that world become better. I never thought of her.
Brittany Anderson?
Yeah.
Yo, she's money. Brittany's my friend.
Yeah.
Super smart, really cool. You know, it's balancing a political life with now a cannabis life, but she's a true believer. Like, she wants us to all succeed. So I'm with her.
And I'd never consider reaching out to her to be like, hey, do you have contacts in these different ministries and these different, I mean, it's kind of obvious now that you've said it, so I'm really thankful that you said it, but I never considered that before. So thank you for that.
This is the concept of lead gen. This is what I did before cannabis, lead generation. You got to think of every sales problem, every marketing problem, which ultimately policy problems are kind of sales problems. We've got to get our ideas into someone else's head, selling them on that. You got to do good lead gen. That's the strategy that you do to say, if I want to talk to this group of people, who do I know that can connect me to this group of people? And are they at arm's length from me? All that kind of stuff. Yeah. It's, it doesn't go on in the grow room, but I think this is part of the value that leaders in businesses that aren't growers can add.
Yeah. So for anybody watching here right now or on YouTube, we actually had Brittany Anderson on a previous Datacraft. I think it was episode 6, because you can go check that out on YouTube if you're curious to see what she has to say about the state of the legal craft cannabis industry. Back to you, Dan.
You mentioned reps up. Listen to the talk.
You mentioned there was a different solution that you had in mind around excise taxes and how that can be addressed to be something that actually is realistic and works well. What is that other solution? Are you open to sharing it with us here today?
I'm super open to sharing it. It's a complementary solution. First and foremost, the $1 per gram minimum does not make sense in a price compressed market where prices on average are $5 or less per gram. So we got to look at that. We got to change that. I know it's not simple. This is really scary because 75 cents on the dollar of every dollar in excise tax goes to the provinces. So have you ever bought a used car?
I haven't. I've never bought a car in my life. I've been car free.
Nice.
But
so when you
I know people who
get
have.
Hopefully you never need a car, but if you ever do, when you first go to get your first car, that's a used car, they're going to play this trick on you where they say, I'm going to sell you this Mazda MX-6 for $2,000. And you say, I think it's worth $1,500. And they say, hold on a sec. I'm just going to go ask my manager, and I'm going to pop into the back. Everyone in this chat knows what I'm talking about. And then they come back out and they say the best he can do is $1,650. So when the provinces who do not have outspoken public-facing stakeholders that we can go approach to say we need excise tax regime, like it literally needs to happen province by province, and those bureaucracies are different. They're monopolies. You know, they really want to hold on to whatever piece of change they can get from the cannabis industry. And a lot of the distributors have lost money in the last couple of years, and they get bad press for that kind of stuff too. So Health Canada, or I keep saying Health Canada. When I say Health Canada, I'm really talking about CRA and Finance Ministry in this context. I'm just so used to complaining about Health Canada that they're getting a bad rap. Health Canada are killing it right now. They're so much better than they used to be. You know, respect Health Canada, but CRA, FinMin, Health Canada also has a voice in this. Like they do need to take on some responsibility and say, hey, we built this industry and now we're having trouble keeping it alive. So when they can say, oh, the provinces will never go for that. some people get turned off. Like some people are like, oh no, they're never going to change it. Like we've been told that straight up that like this isn't a priority, you know, to change the excise regime. Of course it's not. It's
which is so absurd to me. It's like if the industry dies, like you're going to lose more money in the long run if people can't survive.
It's just a hard pill to swallow that this is killing the industry. And sometimes they can be resistant to that truth. They're like, I don't know if it's really killing the industry, man. And I'm like, it's really killing the industry.
I think that metric that you shared, that you have to pay every single month 3 times as much for excise duty as you do for your labor with 65 employees. I think that how do you hear that and then dispute that it's not sustainable?
I'm with you. So it's going to be a hard fight and it's a worthy fight, but what we do need some coordination between provinces advocating for tariff reform as well as Health Canada, Finance Ministry, and CRA all advocating for excise reform. So aside from that, change to just a floating percentage. That's the way to do it. It's going to result in some cheaper ounces. It doesn't really matter that much. And it allows us all to get the fundamentals into shape. There's no other jurisdiction in the world that taxes cannabis so heavily. And even in like jurisdictions where there's 15% levied at the point of sale, at the end customer, which isn't in the middle of the supply chain and falls completely on the producer, they still have taxation issues. They still have issues with competing with the illicit market. And so we got to be mindful that like, it's a young business. Let's make sure it has every resource it needs to go out and convert people and bring people into our way of thinking and get it regulated and, you know, pesticides and all the great things that happen when we actually make that work and show them a good financial value at the end of the thing. So I'm rambling again. The second piece is that I think we've got an amazing model in craft beer. This is provincially regulated generally. I think there are some federal implications, but if you brew below a certain amount of beer, 15,000 hectoliters, you get taxed at a certain level. If you brew more than that amount of beer, you get taxed at a higher level, which you can afford to pay because you have economies of scale that otherwise make your margins better on higher volume products.
Yeah.
Now, if you get down to like local distillery level, there's a whole other tax category. We've done that with licensing categories. We know the difference between a standard, a processor, a micro, an outdoor. And so there's that right there is an inherent acknowledgement that these businesses need to be treated differently.
Yeah.
Medium-sized businesses like us, large-sized businesses, you know, like an Afria, and then small-scale businesses like a micro, they really all have different burdens on their enterprises. And there's no doubt that the economies of scale in cannabis are huge. Like a good outdoor grower can grow for 30, 40 cents a gram right now. The best greenhouses are growing for like 60, 65 cents, maybe less than that. Mm-hmm. And so they can definitely afford to pay a bit more of their share.
Yeah.
And so real simple. We just put the alcohol regs in front of them and say, hey, this is how we tax alcohol. Maybe we should tax cannabis in the same way.
And so you're imagining like a different floating point percentage value for each of the sectors that you just outlined there.
So my negotiation coach told me to never say numbers first.
I'm not asking the specific numbers. I'm just asking if that's what you're imagining, that they would be numbers for each category. You'd have like X for your Auroras and Tilrays, Y for your Tantalus Labs and Rubicon Organics, and Z's for all the micros that you have out there. Is that like kind of the type of thing that you're imagining in your head?
Sounds like a good idea to me. That's about right. And it'll change business strategy a bit, because small to medium enterprises that are looking at expanding really rapidly, they'll have to think twice about that and say, should we stick to our knitting? We can do this scale at this quality, or should we go try to be a massive greenhouse operation? The same thing from the transition to micro to standard. You might say, hey, I could go do all this extra stuff, but I'm going to have to pay extra taxes. And so I got to be mindful of that. And hopefully, all else the same, it would drive an incentive to becoming a micro. You're like, oh, the numbers are a lot cleaner for us. And if I just want to run my small business, my family business, what have you, I think it would be a really logical progression to then being able to hold up business success stories to illicit market growers that have seen nothing but blood and guts in the papers. Like there's nobody out here killing it right now, especially the large LPs are losing money by the hundreds of millions a year, we need to be able to demonstrate financial success.
Yeah.
operational success, actual success in these businesses. Say this is something you can come in, you can do, you can make a good living, and you can pursue your dream of being in the cannabis industry.
Yeah, I mean, I live in the Kootenays, which is often considered the heart of the craft cannabis industry here in Canada. And I know that there, from research that Community Futures and a few other organizations here have done, that there's about 2,000 operators that want to transition. 1,950 of them are just waiting. They're just watching. They see all their friends trying and having a really hard time, and they're just like sitting on the fence. Or like, why would I do that? Like, I want the transition. I don't want to stay underground. I don't want to have that risk of my kids being taken away or whatever pressures and legitimate anxieties exist there. But at the same time, if I just enter this industry, I'm just doomed to fail. Like, I can't see myself succeeding. And so that's just one particular region within BC, and there's many others in BC and throughout the rest of Canada where there's a lot of people who are like that, who are just, they'd rather be legitimate, but not if it's impossible.
Right. And the not if it's impossible is a big question, right? Because I've been told 1,000 times that many different things that Tantalus Labs has now accomplished would be impossible.
Yeah.
And so there's an element of it where, like, I'm out here, preaching doom and gloom about a fucked up excise tax situation that I believe can change and will change and should change. And I believe that over 10 years, this is a great industry to become a part of.
Yeah.
There's a good phrase. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago.
Yeah.
The second best time is now.
Yeah.
And so, like, I think we all need to work together to push regulations in the right direction and facilitate the growth of, a global example of what a healthy cannabis industry should be. Yeah. But I also believe that if someone tells you it's hard and you shrink back from it, that's not a good instinct for being in the cannabis business or any business. So there's got to be a degree of, I'm going to figure it out no matter what.
Yeah.
And that has got me to this place where I can barely pay my taxes. So maybe I shouldn't be listened to. But